Ready when you are.
Schizophrenia, xenophobia, and imminent mechanophilia. All on this 33rd I'll Explain Later, the Doctor Who podcast that should have given them independence years ago. With your hosts John West,
Jim Hall,
and Matt Needer. Tonight, during his long decades behind bars, Nelson Mandela must have found solace that the plight of those living under segregation was being highlighted by John Pertwee's adventure with some scuttling crabmen and a furious bully dressed as a Christmas pudding in 1972's political hot potato, The Mutants.
David Cronenberg's 1996 adaptation of Crash proved controversial in its depiction of deranged souls who can only find sexual gratification with broken-down vehicles. By 2011, this had become mainstream, thus Saran Jones, as the TARDIS, ends up getting exhausted during her encounter with Matt Smith in The Doctor's Wife.
and the Fourth Doctor meets exciting new companion Leela, and before long he's got her right inside his mouth before demanding to be shown the holiest of holies. Louise Jameson beats a talking cabbage any day in 1977's The Face of Evil.
Hey, how you doing? Welcome to show 33. Hope you had a good Easter.
Did you get all the eggs that you wished for, Jim?
Absolutely. Before we go any further, bit of news at the top of this show, which is, it's kind of traditional by now that we take a bit of a summer break, but that's going to be coming a little earlier. Mm-hmm. So this is actually going to be our last show.
Not summer, we hasten to add. Summer is not coming any
definitely
earlier.
Not.
No.
But yeah, this is going to be our last show for a couple of months. There's going to be a break for a few reasons, one of which is the very happy news that John and Claire are about to become parents.
Yes.
Will have done by the time this goes out. So congratulations to you guys.
We're very happy with how it turned out.
Oh, Christ. But you're thrilled as parents to little Nissa, aren't you?
Yeah, little Nissa, she's done well. She's got the little cameo. She's left her skirt lying around.
What's the name you went for? Nissa Ace Clara West in the end, wasn't it?
Dodo.
Dodo.
Yeah.
John was pretty insistent that becoming a father wasn't going to dent the scheduling of the show, but we've decided
Immediately taking 2 months off.
It might be an idea.
I threw myself at your mercy.
Might be an idea. Apparently becoming a parent can be quite a sort of big deal. So yeah.
Also, I think the NSPCC might have views about one of the first experiences a child having being watching a loose cannon reconstruction of something on YouTube. I
think it would go to The Hague. I'm not sure it stops at the borders.
But the news doesn't stop there, does it, Jim?
It doesn't, no, because this is my final show for the podcast, or at least as a regular co-host. After threatening to do so for quite a while, I'm finally going to leave London and swim back upstream to the Midlands.
Build a new life for yourself.
Absolutely. So yeah, my immediate future is going to be lots of dealings with estate agents and job interviews and things, although I think that might just be something I'm coming up with as a displacement activity to avoid watching Web Planet and Seeds of Death.
And all those other Matt Smiths that we've not covered.
I mean, I'll be coming back at some point in the future, I should think.
And I think it's only
Dropping
fitting
by.
that right now we give you the send-off that Colin Baker never had.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, we're not going to put Teddy into a wig and have him writhe around on the floor. Teddy's the dog, by the way, just in case anyone...
But if any of our listeners do a good Jim Hall impression, please do drop us an email to hello@explainlater.com.
The true reason I am leaving is that earlier in the week, Matt did get an email from Michael Grade and Jonathan Powell, just saying that they do want to change the format of the podcast, and their big
It was
changes...
a memo.
Yeah. Was to get rid of me. So
No, the sixth floor have spoken, and they've said there's no more money to make this either as well.
So
they've insisted that John and I stay on.
Wait a second, there was money in the first place.
But yeah, I think you guys are planning a little reformat for the show, which I'm a little bit in the dark about. So I'm looking forward to hearing what that is.
As if it wasn't bad enough news that Jim is moving on from the podcast, the really bad news is it's going to continue. Yes, the show will continue.
As a series of novels.
Too broad and too deep for Apple Podcasts. Yeah. No, the show will continue and will pop up a little nearer the time to give you a little insight into what that might look like.
Or sound like.
Or sound like, even. Well,
it's going to become a video.
We're not going to pivot to video. No. That's all in the future. We've got an immediate, more pressing task at hand, haven't we, Jim?
Absolutely, which is to review the Mutants. All the way back to 1972, where, carrying out a mission for the Time Lords, the TARDIS travels far into the future to a sky-based station orbiting the planet Solos, which is part of Earth's declining empire. The Third Doctor and Jo are caught between the Solonians, who are demanding independence, and the schemes of the obsessive Marshal, who's hell-bent on changing the atmosphere of Solos to make it habitable for humans. Even though this will wipe out the Solonians, whose efforts so far seem to have triggered a series of bizarre mutations in the native population. John has watched this recently, and I'm thinking he may have detected some political subtext to it, which he's probably keen to talk to us about. But before we get there, let's address the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Matt, what did you think of John Pertwee's neck scarf in this story?
Wow, yes. I mean, it's a little... how would we describe it? I mean, it's a neckerchief here, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
I mean, I'd defer to John West on matters of men's fashion, but...
nice threads.
Yeah, I mean, as always, nice threads. Various other... Well, what colour's the smoking jacket in this one?
It's red.
Red.
Got the classic red.
And the cape has a blue satin lining.
Yeah, I mean...
Something.
The man, as ever, looks like a total boss.
And the neckerchief thing is kind of pink or purple, which is beautiful because, of course, he's got the blue lining of the cape and the red in the jacket, and so it links the two. I thought it was really smart.
Oh, you're just like Daniel Day-Lewis in The Phantom Thread.
Yeah, I know. He looks great.
Mm.
John, oh God, yeah, he looks great, but I think he may wear a sort of neckerchief in the Sea Devils as well. But I was going to say, there is something about this story. It seems a bit of a square peg and stands sort of...
This sort of has no reputation, does it? Oddly, I'd never seen it before.
Yeah, and it's not one that really gets mentioned very often either.
It rarely comes up.
Yeah. So go on, Matt. What did you think of this?
I thought this was fantastic. I absolutely loved this. I think I was slightly surprised by how much I enjoyed it. I mean, cards on the table, regular listeners will know that we always enjoyed the John Pertwee stories. And I think of all of the eras of classic Doctor Who, those are the ones that we've actually, I think, really enjoyed mining. And, I've certainly been very surprised by how sort of socially and politically resonant and interesting they are, both in themselves and also for our times now. I mean, a lot of the issues they're addressing have bubbled back up again in the popular consciousness. I'd never seen this before. Bob Baker and Dave Martin, who their reputation very much sits as being, sort of fun but utilitarian writers, perhaps, of Doctor Who, although I think we all have...
And here they delivered like a Malcolm Hulk six-part.
I mean, that's exactly it. I mean, for me, delivering this, they deserve to be put on that plane with your Malcolm Hulks, your Bob Slomans. I think this is absolutely terrific stuff.
You mean Malcolm Hulk and Bob Sloman?
I mean Malcolm Hulk and Bob Sloman.
Of course, the running thread is Terence Dix. So perhaps we should be sort of doffing our cap a bit to him because, this
is something I find terribly interesting. I'm glad you've mentioned Terence Dix at this point. I mean, obviously we'll sort of drill into the themes of this a bit more, and I think Dix's take on the subject matter here, because this is one of the ones where I bothered to watch the behind-the-scenes documentary on this, which was fascinating.
Oh, I
didn't.
An
interview with Terence Dix. But
the documentary is called Mutt Mad.
Yes. But the top line of this, basically, I think, obviously, I mean, it's barely even an allegory for the withdrawal of the British Empire from India. I mean, it's like... It's
pretty on the nose.
It's totally on the nose. It really delivers on its allegory by being so detailed and so carefully thought out in all aspects of the characterization, the plot development, where all that goes, how all of the characters interact, how, densely constructed this whole situation is. It's not just sort of generic space empire, generic repressed population. There's been so much thought into how all of this stuff joins up. Plus you've got John Pertwee and Katie Manning, on absolutely singing form with this. We're only a year and a half into their partnership, but
they're clearly mates.
The chemistry is just off the scale with this. I loved it. It's 6-parters, so yes, it could be a bit shorter, but fine, that'll be the first and last time I mention that. I think this is terrific. John.
No, it's a tad flabby towards the end, but I terribly dull for our listeners, but I completely agree with Matt. I mean, one of the things I find truly extraordinary about the construction of this, Matt's already spoken about it, but there isn't just a very sort of binary state.
It's about the British Empire because there's a space empire.
No, and it's not that there's an oppressor class and there's the oppressed. The oppressor class has different sort of currents within it, and even the decision by the high up political class on Earth to give Solos its independence, that's not a progressive decision.
No, it's money.
It's just like, we can't afford this anymore. It's becoming a hassle.
That scene where Geoffrey Palmer turns up early on and explains to the Marshal exactly how fucked the Earth Empire is.
Yeah,
it's extraordinary. He really like lays it down. It's like,
well, it's that moment of Britain being the sick man of Europe, and we were dismantling our empire at a point where Britain wasn't the dynamic, forward thrusting economy leading in Europe that it perhaps is today.
Global Britain.
But but what I liked as well was that when you come to the Solonians, is it? When you come to the Solonians, they're also very mixed. So you got the hot-headed Kai, who sort of never fails to make a political speech when action is required. And that's quite funny, because even where you kind of, I think at some point there's somebody, I agree with you, but this isn't the time for a political speech. I think it's when they're in the
whenever he's got an audience on.
Well, and in fact, that although yes, I mean,
so I really felt a kinship with him. but so there's that. Even though his heart's in the right place, he's a lot about rhetoric and little about actually pragmatically seeing where there are opportunities to advance his cause.
Well, because also a lot of the events of this story could have been entirely avoided if he hadn't been shouting Geoffrey Palmer down in the summit at the beginning, where the Earth Empire is about to give them their independence. It's only because Palmer can't get a word in edgeways that sort of all of this
he gets
kicks
assassinated.
No, I don't know about that, because obviously the Marshal has already put the assassin into the room.
This is true.
So I think before he'd managed to speak about independence, there would have been the assassination anyway. So I don't think it's entirely fair to blame Kai, but I see where you're coming from. He doesn't let him get a word out, and actually the guy's there to give him what he wants for the wrong reasons, which is delicious. But he is there to give him what he wants, and he doesn't let him finish. What's his name?
Baron's the
Varan. Yeah. Varan, the enemy of Kai, who is from admittedly a rather broad-brushed sort of warrior race.
Tribe.
That's a little phrase we'll come back to.
Won't be the only tribe we encounter this evening.
But the fact that they've been collaborating with the overlords, as the humans are called, and only as a result of betrayal are they, willing to rise up against the humans, but still not become allies of Kai's. It's just, everything about this is really well drawn. It's a really fully realised kind of world.
Jim, do you like this?
Yes. Like you say, it doesn't have much of a reputation, as in, like, it's under people's radars most of the time. What you do read about it, people are a little negative, and I think it can be because it is Bob Baker and Dave Martin, who have reputations more for doing... this is right between Claws of Axos and the Three Doctors, which seems to be more the kind of stuff they do, which is just bonkers ideas.
Sort of rubbery runarounds.
Rather than, is it Bob Baker in the interview on the?
I think so. Yes.
Who says, "Oh yeah, we were very politically motivated characters," which isn't really what you associate them with. Like I say, it's more Malcolm Hulke. It's I've watched this quite a few times recently, probably about 3 times in the last 18 months or something, which, as we said with the Highlanders, Doctor Who's not really, certainly the old series isn't really robust enough to do that a lot of the time. It seems to get better every time I watch it, though.
Wow.
There's more and more in there for you to appreciate once you get past things like, there's just a look to this, which is a bit unlike the other. Yeah. What I'd be interested to ask is, we are big fans of Malcolm Hulke. Do you think his take on this would be much different? Because it seems the stories that he's done that we've covered, he wouldn't have an out-and-out villain. He'd have people, there'd be a lot more nuance in the individual characters. Whereas I think you've said here, there are other elements of the Earth Empire who do want to give them independence or whatever. But someone like the Marshal is just out-and-out an incredible villain, isn't he? But given what he's about, I don't think you could really suggest his motivations are coming from a good place or something.
Well, but it splits the difference, really, because it's not just that the Marshal is an evil character. The Marshal is very much a product of a system, and his motivation is very clearly drawn. It's devastating, that bit where again who is the Geoffrey? Is he the ambassador? Who is the Geoffrey?
He's the
Palmer?
administrator.
The administrator.
Yeah.
That's it. When he turns up and he says, "Oh, don't worry, we'll find something for you. Maybe something in the records office, something clerical." And you just see, this guy who, previously has been running a planet. He just sort of crumbles and resolves at that point to double down on what he's doing. So. Yeah, I mean, obviously Malcolm Hulke, it would have been just about all of those kind of shifting factions kind of wobbling out of control. Here you do have a clear villain, but, he is very much, he's built into that system. I think episode 1 of this is fantastic in particular because it does just have this pressure cooker situation that just completely just like boils over pretty much at the point where you've got the first cliffhanger. All of these threads which have been so economically set up, the mystery of why the Doctor's been given this box, already the incredible detail you're given about the state of the Earth Empire, their relationship with Solos, the mystery of what's going on down on the surface with these mutations that the Solonians are undergoing and who might be responsible. It just reaches this head of steam right at the end of part 1, which then, for me, does, oddly, like for a 6-parter, does deliver on that momentum for the rest of the story. So no, yeah, I mean the Marshal is perhaps more of a trad villain, but he's as detailed as any other aspect of this.
And Paul Whitson-Jones is fantastic.
Oh my God, he's terrific.
He's such relish, and even it's a bit cruel, but the fact he's a little fat bastard.
Oh, totally. Yeah, no, I mean he's perfectly
around,
cast. He's that fat old boy network sort of, and
he's living high on the hog while everyone else.
But he's a fat aristocrat in the way that then obviously you've got sort of his superiors, so the investigator who appears at the end, and obviously Geoffrey Palmer as the administrator are all pretty plummy. But then further down the chain, I mean, obviously we'll come on to Stubbs and Cotton, the little sort of double act of guards. But Stubbs is a northern working class blue collar type, and Cotton is that rarity of like a major speaking part black actor in classic series Doctor Who. There is clearly a class pecking order which has been very consciously evoked with the casting and the characterization here, and Paul Whitson-Jones as the Marshal fits that perfectly, I think.
I was going to say, when I watched this about last year, I think it was with my friend Matthew, who's I don't think had seen it before, but he was looking at the Marshal thinking, what? He says, "What's that SB insignia on it?" And I said, "It's Skybase." And I thought it stood for son of a bitch.
To come back to your question, Jim, about would Hulk maybe have not had it? Would it have been more structural and less sort of great man theory or great horrible man,
fat man,
great bastard theory?
I just
J.W. Pepper theory.
The thing about it is that in episode 6, the speed with which the investigator, who it's fairly clear has his doubts, the speed with which he is happy to believe the Marshal's version of events when the mutant attacks.
Well, it's just panic, I think, isn't it? Like emergency. Yeah.
But he just immediately goes, like, even though he's been presented with some evidence saying that the Marshal, and you just at the point where you think that he's about to get his comeuppance because that's been presented. As soon as there is an external threat of any kind, the established order quickly folds him back into the...
the racial and class pecking order in terms of who gets believed.
Yeah, so although I don't necessarily think Hulk would have done it exactly like this, it's of a piece with Hulk's vision of how different bureaucratic social constructs create villainy. And he's very much, even though he is an individual evil person, he's very much a product of that system as well, which allows evil people to flourish. It allows them...
And also incompetence.
But it not only does it allow them to evil and incompetence to flourish, but if they're in a position of power, they're more likely to be believed simply by virtue of that position of power than the truthfulness of what they're saying. And, you mentioned already Cotton. Right at the beginning of episode 1, I couldn't agree more with Matt, by the way, that episode 1, it sounds like it's damning it with faint praise, because I do think episode 1 is the best episode, but it's just because it sets everything up so perfectly that it can roll out.
You just think, right, I'm in.
Yeah. I mean, I made a note that 7 minutes and 30 seconds in, you've had the guy, the mutant old guy being chased through the woods with the mist and everything. You've got the guard saying, Cotton in this case, saying we should have given them independence years ago, which is not an anodyne line to give to an actor of colour, by the way.
No.
And then they file the report that he's been found dead as usual,
Without
i.e.
his mask.
Yeah. And then there's the Time Lord assignment. You've got Joe and the Doctor laughing about going through the bacterial screening or delousing, and they share a laugh, which shows you their relationship.
Joe is so great in that scene when they arrive and the Doctor says, we're on a sky base, and she goes, amazing. Like, she's like really excited to be there.
Yeah,
it's
she
just a
is.
real pep to her there. Sorry, carry on.
And then they talk about the fact that the Overlords came and they brought disease. Famously, of course, you know, in early Imperial encounters, British settlers brought all sorts of diseases to Aboriginal folk who you know, wherever they were. You got the collaborators in terms of those who are, you know, Varans people, and the anti-imperialist themes and the different factions within all of the different, whether they're human or Solonian. All of that is in the first 7 minutes. I mean, that's nuts.
But it's even that the design work is doing a job here that, I mean, it's sort of very on the nose because we see it so many times, but the separate segregated lifts for Overlords and Solonians, and then that sign
which
saying,
they make
are you wearing your oxy mask?
Which they make a point of the Doctor deliberately, like he mentions segregation, he mentions it.
But with that word.
To draw your attention to it, and then you notice it every single time it comes up.
I know. It's extraordinarily well done. But yeah, and I mean, in some ways, because it's been commented that, I mean, I think the primary allegorical thrust of this is the collapse of the British Empire. But it's also then folding in so many other things about generally that attitude of
the American civil rights, South Africa.
All of these things come into it.
Which are big things for a kid's show to be doing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, it's sort of amazing that it does. I mean, it's mashing up essentially all of these kind of rights issues that are bubbling under the surface at the time. But it's amazing that how coherent it feels while still trying to address almost everything in a way. And then even then it gets down to the fact, so when the the Doctor ends up in this situation because the Time Lords have given him a secret box
brutalist football.
Yes, that he has to deliver
with no instructions.
With no instructions at all. So it's slightly opaque as a mission for the Time Lords, but I'll let that go.
It's obviously a fixed point in time that needs to roll out.
Needs to happen.
And obviously they want him there to make sure things go.
Yeah.
Rather than just delivering it. They know he's going to get involved, so...
But what turns out to be in it is these tablets written in ancient Solonian writing, and then that's a fascinating thread that there's obviously an ancient culture on this planet where even the natives can no longer read their native language. So that idea that the sort of colonial oppression ostensibly being done in the name of progress can lead to the loss and deletion of knowledge. The fact that we're not even just smothered and suppressed, but forgotten. There is we sort of assume that kind of progressivism is about the accumulation and development of knowledge, whereas the idea that like knowledge here can be erased even from the people for whom it can belong to is huge.
Oppressed peoples famously have their culture denied them. I mean. Franco in Spain, for example, was hugely restricted. I think he banned or certainly forbid the teaching in schools of sort of Basque or Catalan languages. So yeah, and Franco was still around to the mid-70s, 75, I think. So therefore this would have been something that would have been in the general kind of sandpit, I suppose, of political debate. I mean, the other thing that's really fascinating in this is the ecological message. There's lots of our environmentalism in this, which again is of a piece with, say, Invasion of the Dinosaurs. All this stuff they're doing, I mean, this is uncannily on the nose, but when they say they're doing all these experiments in the atmosphere that are, they're doing all this sort of industrial stuff which is creating warming in the atmosphere, which is having unintended consequences. It's just... Yeah, that feels pretty on the nose.
But then it throws into the mix what I think are really interesting sci-fi ideas as well. So the idea of the planet with the 2,000-year-long year, and an amazing inversion of what you normally get with this kind of thing, where the monsters turn out to be a natural evolutionary state. So the fact that these mutations occur naturally, all that's happened is that they've just been sped up by the Solonians' interference. That's a really nice sort of twist in the tail thing.
Except that, you see, this is the interesting thing. It kind of shows that, and this is where perhaps I suppose the South Africa analogy particularly lands, is that it's not simply saying that they can solve the problem by themselves, although eventually they do, but that solidarity from outsiders can assist with the development as they should have developed.
And this then leads to the thing. It's such an imperfect comparison because I wish I could find a better example, but I can't think of one in my head. But the way, in terms of how the characters exit the situation, how Solos is left at the end, it reminded me of one of those kind of revisionist fantasy type things like, and as I say, this is an imperfect comparison, but something like Inglourious Bastards, where at the end you have Hitler being gunned down by the Jews, essentially. It's this sort of revenge fantasy. And obviously this isn't anything near as tasteless
listening to David Bowie.
While listening to David Bowie. But here you've got, not only have you got the withdrawal of the Earth people allows the Solonians to achieve a heightened state and possibly better understanding of themselves than they may have had previously, but a black guy is also put in charge. It's nuts. The ending to this is brilliant. I mean, it's like it comes out swinging.
No, but not only is he put in charge, he's put in charge of transition.
Yeah,
and then says, and when that's done, I'm going home as well.
Yeah,
back to Earth. So it doesn't deny that outsiders can be useful, but they can only be useful if they're in common cause and in solidarity with those people who are wishing to develop on their own terms.
Yeah, and on that theme as well, it's time to maybe talk about some of the other characters in it, because it has got a lot of characters that crop up.
There are a lot, yeah.
Yeah, so someone else who helps with the transitioning is Sondergaard, this sort of Timothy Leary character.
Absolutely fascinating.
It's played by John Hollis, who'll be familiar to anyone who likes genre cinema from the late 70s.
He's like a character who's wandered in from Apocalypse Now or The Mission.
That's about the only films he's not in. He's in Superman, Star Wars as Lobot.
Is he meant to be Dutch in this? Is he...
Who knows what he's going to be? He's a Cockney in real life, John, or was.
Right.
But yes. But he's a great character,
sort of physicist turned anthropologist.
He's a renegade. I think he initially had another
He's a loose cannon physicist who's become a...
He works for Loose Cannon doing reconstructions.
Loose cannon physicist who's become...
he's gone native.
An anthropologist who doesn't play by the rules.
Yeah, he lives in a radioactive cave. But he's terrific. And he's a good character, but Hollis's performance as well, I think, really sort of livens
it's just
things
so
up.
Unusual that it's very, very watchable, I think. And it's like... it's so odd, but it just adds to this. You're kind of glued to it. But also, his introduction as well. Those scenes of him sort of wandering out into the cave with all the lights going off and he's
the
wearing
psychedelic
a hazmat
cave.
suit. It's fucking psychedelic. It's
and Joe's losing
mad.
consciousness, and it's really out.
There's some amazing images in this. All that cave stuff works brilliantly as well. It's like it's Christopher Barry, who I think a couple of months ago we said may have been a little too long in the tooth for doing Creature from the Pit, because obviously he was there from the second ever Doctor Who story. But to be honest, I think there's quite a lot of sort of groovy, odd camera work in this.
Some of the camera work in this is absolutely sensational. So when the TARDIS lands on the skybase at the beginning, there's a very interesting crane shot where it's above the TARDIS and then sweeps down and round to the door where they exit from it. It's really beautiful.
And that gets used again during the sort of, not debate, the administration think, it's like a cherry picker or something.
Yeah.
But they
have like a mini...
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly, Jim. They do the same thing just after Stubbs has been killed. There's a sweep shot around Cotton, who... Okay, I can't remember who plays Cotton.
Rick James.
Yeah. Who he...
Singer of Super Freak, wasn't he?
Oh, yes. Rick James did this, and his only other credit that I'm aware of is in the penultimate episode of Blake 7.
Okay.
Where, as Tatwood points out...
he may have other credits, but that's the only one Jim's aware of.
What I'm going to say is he's limited...
He's not a great actor.
He's a limited actor, but actually that point where Stubbs is dead and they do the sweep shot around Cotton, he does manage to look broken at that point.
I find he's a limited actor, but I find his performance oddly affecting. There's something quite honest about it, which I liked him.
Him and Stubbs, the two make a nice... You kind of believe that they'd be pals.
It's the fact that he calls him Stubbsy all the way through as well, which I love. It's very sweet.
Because he was meant to be a Cockney character, wasn't he? But they recast.
So tell me about that recasting. I'm fascinated by that. Was it not written with a view to being played by a black
I don't think
actor?
it was. No, it wasn't meant to
that
be.
Was
I think that
directorial,
was. Yeah.
It really works.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But also elsewhere in the cast, we have our old friend George Pravda as well.
Yeah, so I'm glad you
as
moved on to
Jaeger.
him.
doing pretty much exactly the same thing as he does in Deadly Assassin.
Yeah,
No, I don't think that's true, because in Deadly Assassin, he's a good guy, and in this, he's incredibly morally compromised.
He's going along with what the Marshal wants, which is changing the atmosphere of Solos. The nice thing is he's been working on this without too much success for a while, and as soon as the Doctor turns up under duress, it sort of helps him out. I'd love that relationship when he's obviously quite impressed with the Doctor, but isn't really up to his standards by any stretch, you know. Reminds me of when you get the IT guy in at work and you're trying to sound like you kind of know what he's doing. I just wondered if the drivers needed updating or something. No, something totally different to that. But I quite like him just sort of following around like a dog for a few episodes. And it's quite nice he doesn't actually get killed, does he? I think he just gets sort of knocked down with a booby trap, but I think he survives through to the end.
It's worse for him. He gets discredited.
Oh,
you know?
yeah.
He gets debunked.
And you know, in episode 5, the Doctor says, "Oh yes, you were just simply obeying orders." We've heard that plenty of times through history and what have you. I did like in episodes, I think it's episode 5, where they're recalibrating the what is it? Matter reversal.
Is it the particle
reversal?
Yeah. And he says, one false move here and we'll become unpeople doing unthings untogether. The Doctor says. There's just lovely little flourishes in the script here like that.
What do we think of the finale where Kai does ascend to become this kind of magic being? Not just as a special effect, but it's a really striking thing from the very first time I saw this years ago.
I was triggered.
Triggered. He just appears and wipes out the Marshal and fucks off again.
I was
triggered. It does feel like, the Doctor should have said something about this.
I was triggered only by virtue of the fact that it reminded me of Ghostlight.
Right.
It's like, oh my god, no. But no, I think that's actually what I liked about that. Actually, it reminded me a bit of I had an English literature teacher at school who was very annoyed by the revisions that Thomas Hardy made to the end of The Return of the Native, whereby
is that when they become crab monsters at the end?
Yeah, that's the one. Where and Thomas Hardy was famously very interested in evolution and what have you, and there's a bit at the end where some of the characters end up. It's a tragic novel, but a couple of the characters end up happy at the end of it. And there's a sense that this was basically something that was insisted upon by his publisher at the time. Whereas I pointed out that actually the fact that Hardy's saying the people fittest to live on this heath would survive because, you know, he's interested in the survival of the fittest, and that might not be fair, but it's kind of like it would make sense that these people would get through to the end and survive because that's the survival of the fittest. And in this sense as well, in a slightly less bleak version, the fact that they have achieved the evolution that they required because the humans, rather than oppressing them, have begun to step back, and they've found common cause with the liberals and those who've wanted to show solidarity. I felt that was a very sort of natural progression. Whether it's beautifully rendered visually, I think mileage will vary, but
it's fine. It's in the world of the sort of psychedelics we've seen in this up until this point. I sort of gave that a pass. I like the mutts as well. I think the suits are a great little design.
The little scales popping out their backs.
Well, the fact that they sort of, I mean, yeah, it's sort of slightly, you know, it's obviously a man in a suit, but there's something about the design that is both beast-like but also carries a sense of pathos to them as well. They seem like sort of slightly sad, confused characters.
Those big eyes.
Yeah, I know. I find it rather endearing. It's like looking at my dog.
One performance I must say I didn't enjoy was James Mellor as Varen. It's just
even when he's mourning the loss of his son and does his little tribal thing, which is drawing a hand over him and going "Aki!" And that's it.
His son, who is imaginatively named Varen's son, was played by Jonathan Sherwood.
Yes.
And
in fairness, the Marshal's just called the Marshal. He doesn't get a name.
Jonathan, but Varen's son appears to have used a wig that was later dusted off by Mike Flowers' Pops. This is really extraordinary hairpiece. Although, I mean, as I said actually before we started recording, I'm surprised that George Pravda's character Jaeger was engaged in atmospheric experiments, given that one gust of wind could have put paid to his toupee. But yeah, fascinating headpieces all round. No, I could have done without the whole Varen subplot. Really, it's my own. I feel it's the only leaden note in this that, you know, he just sort of. It's fine for him to be at the council, but the way it kind of drags on and on
gets
and on.
chased around. It looks like they're growing some mysterious crops in the hydroponics garden.
I'll say.
Yeah, I'm not sure what Stubbs and Cotton are up to in there.
Yeah, right.
No wonder they can't be bothered to answer the calls.
Yeah, when they're playing space chess.
Space chess. Yeah.
No, I just think this is fabulous. It is so redolent of the era as well. This is a time when, we should probably give a shout out as well to Barry Letts. They're mixing things up, not just doing the unit stories at this point. You've got the sort of Time Lord assignments and that sort of thing,
which is a clever little idea to sort of not, you're just not
to mix it up.
Yeah, exactly.
But everybody knows what they're doing. The writing is terrific. The script editing. I'd like to hear more about the documentary. But...
Well, this is the thing. I mean, it's like because in the documentary, Terrance Dicks mentions that he certainly, and this is his claim, but he had to do a lot of work with Baker and Martin on all of their scripts to get them. He said they were, sort of amazing ideas people, but in order to actually get it in exactly to sort of crunch it down, he had to step in and do a lot. But then Dix also says, and he's quite open about it on the documentary, that he says he's very pro the British Empire still, and he says that in his opinion, and I quote, if you look at the state of Africa and Asia today, it might be a lot better if the British were still there running things. It's a thing he says on the DVD. Then they cut to Barry Letts, who says that he disagrees with this, although he said his parents were involved in the British Empire.
He could see some good comes from it.
He could see that some good was done out there, but he is, as a blanket policy, anti-imperialist. And then you've got Baker and Martin, who are saying that they consider themselves children of the 60s, quite radical, this kind of thing. And also Baker says that him and Dave Martin had a mutual friend who was in the process of being set up with a nice little farm in South Africa and sent out there. And he said, they had an absolutely blazing row with him about this and sort of completely fell out, and that feeds into the script. The fact that Terrance Dicks obviously had a lot of work to do to make something coherent out of this, and yet it feels ideologically coherent. There's nothing feels watered down or sort of diluted or even just muddied. It's incredibly clear in what it wants to say and what it wants to do. This is something that we've praised in the past when we've looked at Malcolm Hogg, whose sympathies do lie towards communism, that you've got this incredible mix of different ideological things going on the production team, and yet it always seems to result in something, that you get all the benefits of it being a sort of mixed production team by everything coming out very nuanced, but it always feels coherent. It never feels like a sort of wash or a compromise or something. I think these guys are absolutely brilliant. They know exactly what they're doing, and at the moment it almost feels like they're hitting out the park every single time.
Bob Baker and Dave Martin, known as the Bristol Boys, because they lived in Bristol, were the bane of my life for several years, and I was the bane of theirs, I think.
Dave Martin and I wrote Claws of Axos, which was our first Doctor Who. It was the kind of baptism of fire.
They were hell's delight to work with. They were madly inventive, full of ideas, and completely undisciplined. I always used to say, you sat down reading one of their storylines, even long before scripts, and you'd say, yes, then hang on a bit, no, what's happening here? No, hang on, and you would end up with a splitting headache rushing out for a drink.
So, fast forwarding then to 14th of May 2011. Series...
2 days after my birthday.
Yeah, yes, that's right. Mm-hmm. So, Series 6, The Doctor's Wife, which is an episode.
Oh, Christ.
This might need an edit. No, but it's the reason this is... So this wasn't originally going to be called The Doctor's Wife, I believe, and this title famously has its roots in the John Nathan Turner era. Is that right,
yes.
Jim?
Yeah, apparently he was concerned there were leaks coming from the office, so I think he put it up as a sort of future story on the schedule on the wall.
Hoping that he'd smoke out.
He'd managed
smoke out the leak. I don't know if you can smoke out a leak.
You can smoke a leak, yeah.
But the title is where the fan service in this episode ends, isn't it? I mean, that's it. It's just a little in joke for the fans in the title.
Yeah, a bit like the Doctor's daughter.
Yeah.
Or the name of the Doctor.
Yeah, so...
What happens in The Doctor's Wife,
What actually
John?
happens in the episode... so glad you asked, Matt. What actually happens in the episode? So, the Doctor responds to a distress call from a fellow Time Lord called the Corsair, and so Wacky Matt Smith, Amy and Rory head to a sentient junkyard-like environment on the edge of the universe, or in a pocket universe. A bubble universe, they call it, don't they? Where they meet...
They're a bit vague on the definition, really.
It's all a bit wibbly-wobbly, spacey.
It's way out there.
Spacey-wacy, yes, that's the phrase we get. Carry on.
Where they meet the strange combo of auntie, uncle, an Ood called nephew, and Idris, played by Saran Jones, all of whom depend on the planet they're living on, this kind of weird kind of space urchin, as Matt Smith calls it, House, which is voiced by Michael Sheen.
Silkily voiced by Michael Sheen.
And House plans to take control of the TARDIS, with Amy and Rory still aboard, lots of corridor horror shenanigans. And House wants to escape. To do this, he wants to siphon off the TARDIS's existing operating matrix, which ends up in the body of Saran Jones, a.k.a. Idris.
She becomes the TARDIS.
Yeah.
Oh, that's why it's called the Doctor's Wife.
That's it.
Ah.
It's to do with the TARDIS.
Scales fall from my eyes.
I know, right? So I'm going to throw this to Jim to start, because Jim, when signalling that this would be the last of the regular episodes that he was going to feature on, made something of a point of insisting that this was in his final episode. So I'm gathering that he has particularly developed opinions about it.
I wasn't keen on covering this one, actually, but we had Father's Day on the last one.
Mistake.
So, yeah. Well, yeah, taking a few steps back, if you have listened to more than a few of these shows, you'll probably know what my opinion of the Stephen Moffat era is. I'm not a fan of his whole writing style on Doctor Who. And with Neil Gaiman again, I dip into comics a little now, but I was a bigger fan when I was younger.
And Neil Gaiman wrote this one.
And
which felt like quite a coup at the time.
Yeah, he's still quite a sort of big name. Yeah, when I was very into comics when I was a bit younger, I did read things like Sandman, which is one of his most celebrated works. Read the few issues of that and it kind of left me cold. Went away from it. Then that got lots of acclaim and I borrowed a load of them, read those again, still couldn't really see what the point, what the big deal was about this. I've got to say, his writing very much reminds me of what I'm not keen on with Moffat, which is he seems more about, I'm going to say gimmicks or just an idea, right, and then working that through in the same way. It's a bit mean of me. It reminds me a bit of when you get an improvisational comedy troupe and they just come up with some variations on it rather than, it's not going to become a sort of big piece in itself. And yeah, watching this, it seems like just a gimmicky idea of what if the TARDIS became a person? And the answer is she's a bit like Helena Bonham Carter in a Tim Burton film. She's in some Victorian gowns. She's a bit loopy, but not distressingly so. She's very flirty. And, I did mention the name of the Doctor earlier. With a lot of these things, I never want them answered. I don't even think they're interesting questions to pose. They're things which are just naturally part of the show. What's the TARDIS's personality like? That's something that's worked since Edge of Destruction, which we reviewed a long time ago. You intuitively get what that is without having to have it nailed down. It'll be as dull as if someone actually sat down and did a story about how regeneration works. We know enough about it.
Midichlorians, isn't it?
We know enough about it to, for it to get by. And it's kind of nice that lots of it is left mysterious because it means you can keep coming up with new stuff on it. So yeah, watching this again, I don't remember enjoying it first time. And watching it again, I just felt like I was watching someone who was pleased with their own idea but wasn't really doing anything interesting character-wise. So it's a bit mean of me to compare it to Father's Day, which we did last time, but I am going to compare them. They're two totally different approaches to doing Doctor Who, I think. And I don't enjoy this one.
I remember enjoying this at the time. I was quite down on the Matt Smith era at the time, and I remember watching this. Sort of generally quite down, but I do remember enjoying this. Watched it again this morning, which is the first time since 2000. When was it? 2010. 11. Since 2011, I've seen it. And I thought it was bilge. There is so much going on, and it is so, especially the first 20 minutes, are so manic and mannered to very little end. I found it a really irritating watch, frankly. But also, I think, as Jim says, it's, and this is a thing that happens quite a few times during the Moffat era. I think there's no reason necessarily. Doctor Who is a show that can do anything and go anywhere, or at least that's what we're told all the time. I certainly don't think there should be any line in the sand about interrogating the show's own tropes if you've got something interesting to say about them.
Yeah, Arc of Infinity is good.
Yeah, absolutely. But this is the thing that comes up time and time again in the Moffat era, that there's the conventions of Doctor Who are largely there because they're utilitarian. There's no reason why a skilled writer can't put flesh on those bones, but it's not enough just to ask the question. And I think this, this is very carried away with its clever idea of anthropomorphizing the TARDIS and making it into a person and then seeing what that relationship would be like. The conclusions that it draws are that she's quite close to the Doctor and is occasionally one step ahead of him, but they have a good relationship. And so I go, wow, well, that was worth it. I mean, also, lest we forget, this recycles an idea from, I'm sure you're both intensely familiar with the mind-blowingly misguided 40th anniversary special that Big Finish did, Zagreus, which had a anthropomorphic TARDIS in it, as played by Nicholas Courtney, who played it as a completely embittered old fuck who was also quite misogynist, I seem to remember. So it's not as if this idea is particularly new. But yeah, I just think it's a lot of whiz-bang nonsense to paper over the fact that we're supposed to think it's quite clever for asking this question. And then it's got nothing interesting to say. And then, this was very warmly received at the time, I seem to remember. And I said, I'm sure I saw a couple of reviews that said, it was ultimately a lovely story about, just a guy's relationship with his car, essentially. And I think, all right, yeah, in a world where Doctor Who can do anything, I mean, are we looking for Doctor Who to be like fucking Herbie the Love Bug or something? I don't know. It's like...
No,
I mean, this left me, and I've quite enjoyed finding some nice things to say about the Matt Smith era on a second viewing, I have to say, and I'm not as I'm not as totally down on the Moffat era, certainly I think as you are, Jim. But
fucking hate it.
This left, yeah, you're pretty down on it. This left me so cold, and I was Anyway, John.
Hey, John.
Yeah, so I remember really, really enjoying this when it came out. I thought it was great. I thought it was sort of almost instant classic territory. And
in the same way as instant coffee?
Well, this is the thing.
Pot noodle?
I just agree so much with Matt. I can't really see what I was finding in it, really. I think perhaps what I saw in it was I hated the rest of everything else that was going on in the season.
Come on, I do
so
almost
much.
People after this.
I hated what was going on in the rest of the season so much that this probably...
I've not seen the Almost People, by the way.
Oh, well, you've got a treat coming up at some point.
Yeah, my only thing...
Do you want to leave London as well, Matt?
It's not on your watch.
Nope.
This kind of felt like a bit of a respite. It begins... I agree so much with Matt. It just begins with wacky Matt Smith going around all limbs and winks, and it's so tough to watch.
It's so punchable at this point.
Yeah, it's just... God... And when the little cube arrives and it knocks on the fucking door, like, oh yeah, how cute is that? And he says, "Come here, you scrumptious little beauty." It's like, oh, fuck off. Just really, seriously, just fuck off.
It is amazing how this almost feels like TV from a different era. Like, right now, do you know what I mean? There was something about it's like... It feels like, in the way that we've discussed that TV's moved on a few times since the Russell T Davies era, and we enjoy those, but they are very much date-stamped to, what drama's doing at the time. Drama's doing something now. Doctor Who needs to move with the times. It does almost feel that, like, this feels old, that whole style of sort of banter dialogue, which I think, a lot of TV has moved away from since then, but was all the rage in sort of 2010, 2011.
And it's one of the reasons Matt Smith's very popular, I think. So as much as we don't like it, a lot of people do really like him.
This had 8 million viewers.
Yeah, and I think...
And rave reviews.
I should have done some more research. I think it did win awards and things, didn't it?
Yeah.
But this is it. I remember being at a friend's wedding not long after this, and one of the mutual friends there, I know he liked Doctor Who a lot, and I said, "Oh, what do you think of the new season?" He said, "Oh, well, there's this and this, but the Doctor's wife, I think that might have been the best episode ever." And I was thinking, really? And I didn't want to upset him, so I just sort of nodded. But I think that's kind of interesting, because I think you do get a thing with Doctor Who fans when they can be quite... they respond to cattle prodding. And I think with this, it sounds like an amazing idea that, we're going to see the TARDIS as a person, And in the same way...
Why?
Exactly, that
But
question,
why?
what will that be like? And the answer is, I don't care.
The thing
It's
is-
going to be very boring and mundane, whatever the answer is. And
Yeah.
the idea is something which is like, you can't get your head around. So it's best to just
It
leave
doesn't
those
have to be
things.
boring and mundane, but you do really need
It's
to...
almost certainly going to end up that
I
way.
mean,
though. It's going to work on
the
a
odds
for the
are.
human audience to
Yeah.
understand,
But you
isn't
need
it?
to read. You need to sit down and go, what is the reason for me doing
Yeah.
this?
And
Not
is
just-
there a story there as well,
Yeah.
rather than just is there a gimmick?
Well,
And
this is the thing, that for all that how manic it is, and as I say, it's flying off in all sorts of directions in those first 20 minutes. There's an awful lot of filler in this. Like the final scenes, and it's very nice to see the old console room again towards the end. You reminded that's a much better set than the one they upgraded to. So some of those final TARDIS scenes seem to go on forever.
Oh, they're chasing around the corridors and stuff.
Well, no, I'm saying actually the final scenes in the TARDIS console.
Oh,
room.
yeah.
Like the dialogue
wrap
seems
up.
to go on for
Yeah.
the wrap up goes on for hours. But yes, also the chasing round the. Again, I mean, it's like it makes the same mistake that Journey to the Centre of the TARDIS made a year later of just
of
making
being commissioned.
of being commissioned, of being on, of happening, but also of just being drab. I mean, the TARDIS. It turns out that it makes the TARDIS boring by wandering around inside these endless, sort of fairly utilitarian corridors.
Yeah,
You'd have
you're,
thought
you're
that,
nailing it down, whereas you should have left it wide open in people's imaginations.
or go nutso and have let's see the crazy time swimming pool and all the other stuff.
Well,
Let's
apparently
see-
there were budget issues because Gaiman had written the swimming pool and all the other stuff, and apparently that was just
The
not.
TARDIS just looks like any other fucking spaceship here, and they're running around in it for ages to relatively little end. I think.
The funny thing is that the setting of the planet, this house planet, that is quite expansive and interesting and weird. I mean, the design crew have brought it on that, I think.
And I like I also like, in terms of what he's writing, to me, the uncle, auntie, and nephew setting.
They're
is
entertaining. They're well
potentially the most-
performed.
Had it been a sort of slow burn, creepy, haunted house kind of thing, with them in it, and to say the two actors, who are they? They're playing
It's
uncle and
Elizabeth
auntie?
Barrington and was it Adrian Schiller?
They're good, and I think that whole potential setup of this sort of creepy junkyard planet, there could have been like a slow burn sort of haunted house thing. I mean, they collapse and die. I think
once
15 minutes
Once
into
they've
it.
explained the
And
setup
it's
to
like-
the audience, they die because there's nothing there for them to do.
Yeah, it's
But it's just
mystifying.
again the fact that he's wearing this sort of foreign legionnaires thing, and that they're sort of cut and shuts of different people, and even some of the dialogue they're given is quite just a couple of one-liners that are quite good. When they're about to die, and he says, "Actually, I feel fine," and immediately keels over.
You've got a smile on your face.
Yeah, I think that stuff works, and the design of the planet, the house planet, and the junk, and all that sort of stuff, and anachronistic, like a spaghetti server and a washing machine all messed up and stuff like that. That all kind of worked for me. Had this weird kind of Terry Gilliam air to it, and I thought that Richard Clarke did a pretty good job on the direction. Actually, the corridors are a bit. The TARDIS corridors, by contrast, I don't think they have brought the design game, as Matt said. But the filming of them and the doors shutting and the sort of the stuff where she finds the really old Rory and it says "kill Amy" and he's all like dead and decaying and stuff. It's a nice little shot, but it doesn't actually arrive at any point. Like, Amy and Rory are still kind of pointless. Neil Gaiman apparently didn't write this knowing that Rory was going to be around, and so he had to be shoehorned in. And basically,
You can never tell.
as throughout the whole era, both Amy and Rory feel completely shoehorned in. There's no really interesting subtext, as we've said a couple of times already. There's no real reason for personifying the TARDIS.
No.
And there's no interesting subtext perhaps beyond the fact that we take some relationships for granted. That seems to be slightly what they're trying to aim at, but it doesn't really land.
Also, there's nothing particularly clever about, so how does this resolve? The Doctor is able to build a TARDIS in 18 minutes, apparently, which is something I noted. But, on this planet where it's established very early on, there's the remnants of a lot of old Time Lords, they just build another TARDIS and turn up, and then it just gets rid of House. And that's fine, and that's done.
I think the other thing that's problematic here, watching it this time round, was the casting of the TARDIS as a what do they call it?
Manic Pixie Dream Girl.
Manic Pixie Dream Girl. Someone who's a little bit quirky and a little bit off the wall,
I'm glad you
but who's
say that,
essentially there to service the male characters, or at least like make their lives easier or what have you.
Because she does seem to be like, I maybe wouldn't want to overstate this, as you say, that kind of idea, the manic pixie dream girl, possibly the writers or someone on the production team's idea of an idealised girlfriend. But she seems just the right side of mentally ill to not be an inconvenience for the hero.
Yeah.
Would that be unfair to say?
Well, I think that's pitched.
It would be unfair.
The one thing I will say, like, there is one thing that is outstandingly positive about this, and that is Saran Jones's performance. She is fabulous. She is a terrific actor.
This was a real sort of bridge role for her as well, wasn't it? Because this was just after she'd come out of Coronation Street, but was sort of one of the things that I think put her on the radar of, like, because obviously now she's one of the biggest actresses on British telly.
I certainly remember being surprised at the end when I saw the credits that it was Saran Jones. I hadn't clocked it was her. I was like, wait, she was in Corrie. And, she's doing a voice, but she doesn't, like, it doesn't sound like someone doing a voice. She is a very good actor.
Oh, and had they given her a character, like, had they given her, like, Missy or someone to play, that might have worked or something.
But that's the thing, she's outstanding in this, I think. And that what she does with the kind of snatched ideas and the notion of a kind of mind without order and playing with that idea of knowing stuff before or during and after and being confused about time. I don't think this works. I think I've made that clear, but I think she is very good in this. And it does feel a bit of a pity that she's been cast as this manic pixie dream girl character and that her character doesn't really have any reason to exist. But I think it's a great performance from her. I think as some of the other supporting cast are very good too. But ultimately, there's no real reason for this to exist. And someone defending the Moffat era could easily say, well, why should there be a reason for it? It's a bit of fun. It's something interesting. It goes down an avenue that Doctor Who's not done before. But just for me, I don't know.
If you're going to turn your gaze inward like that, I think you've got to find something interesting to say. And I mean, I like, obviously we routinely praise the Russell T Davies stories. He had a read on what the Doctor's internal psyche was. I was a little bit bored of that by the end because he did sort of run that into the ground over 4 years. But if you are going to become, I've described the Moffat era before as being auto-parasitical. It's like it uses a lot of the tropes of the show as generators of story, as opposed to just simply the mechanics to avoid having to explain how you got into a story. Again, I don't necessarily think there's any reason why that can't work or that it's something Doctor Who shouldn't do. But I think it's not, there's this, I think, and it crops up a few times during this era, this sort of idea of there's something iconoclastic about breaking the rules. There are so many characters who regenerate at various points during the Moffat era as well. Because
tired of seeing that orange powder.
I just get really tired of that effect. But it's those kind of things of like, we're breaking all the rules of Doctor Who. Again, no reason why that can't work, but you've got to have something interesting to say. And, ultimately the only conclusion that this draws about the Doctor's relationship with the TARDIS is that, it's a sort of smart, semi-sentient creature and they get on pretty well, I think.
Which, as Jim said, and people were saying, when I did my research about this, people were saying, oh, no one had looked at this. As Jim said, actually, The Edge of Destruction did this in the first Doctor era.
And it was a striking idea then.
And it was. And actually, the thing that everything that's going wrong isn't actually stuff going wrong. It's the TARDIS trying to save the situation, and therefore there's a degree of sentience there. That's interesting, and it's just, and also it's not it's not played as a major psychological thing. It's played as an interesting kind of puzzle with.
And also that episode came out of production problems. It's like we haven't got the sets ready for the next one, so we need 2 episodes quick.
Yeah.
Whereas you get the sense this was the best story this is the story Neil Gaiman really wanted to come to the table with.
Well, it was, because it was meant to be scheduled for season 5 and then was put to season 6 on the
budget reasons.
Budget reasons, which does baffle me slightly because I don't really see what the budget issue is here.
Yeah, this did go through a lot of rewrites, so who knows what the original one was.
Well, I think it was this idea that you would see the TARDIS swimming pool, and it would be.
I think there were general production problems during the first Moffat season.
But I mean, and look, there are. I know, Jim, you're not a big fan of the sort of wisecracking stuff, but there were a couple of lines in here that do stand out, like when they materialise the TARDIS right where the cousin, the what's he called, nephew,
the nephew,
yeah, and he says, "Oh, another Ood I failed to save."
Oh, I hated that. I thought that was so crass, given that...
But it is standout, don't you think? It's something really...
It kind of...
stark.
I made a note of that because it left such a nasty... I don't know whether it's just that obviously we've thought about the Ood.
But don't you think it's quite a realistic... Don't you think it's quite a realistic kind of
It sounds like it's just being dismissive of it.
Makes the Doctor sound utterly dismissive about an enslaved race that were subsequently sort of genocided.
If Matt Smith lands on Solos...
I was perhaps more generous in the sense that I thought...
Because it's delivered as a joke.
It is, and I think that's problematic. I think it kind of would work. You see, I think this is, again, it just doesn't land. I think if you read it through this psychological prism, then it's a comment that makes sense. He's going to house the planet thinking that he can save the Time Lords, right? And he wants to be forgiven, so he wants to find some more Time Lords so that he can explain what he did.
So that line I liked, when Amy says to him, "You just want to be forgiven," and then he pauses and he says, "Don't we all?" And it's like, and his delivery of that is really good. That was one I noted down as a line I liked.
But I thought that, I guess I just read it that he was saying another Ood I failed to save in the prism of I didn't manage to save these guys and they're all dead, and now at the hit, it's just another one to put on the slate. But that's how I read it. But
I read it as quite a crass joke, and it really annoyed me.
Next.
But the other one...
Next on your howlers list.
No, well, this, it was very obvious. They use this all the time, that when Sheen says, I've killed hundreds of... Fear me, I've killed hundreds of Time Lords. Fear me, I've killed them all. I thought that was quite...
That's a good line.
It's a nice line. Although, as it turns out, he didn't. So, next question.
Mm-hmm.
But look, I'm looking for things to be positive about, because generally I found it fascinating that I did enjoy watching this when it came out.
Yeah, so
I
did
felt
I.
like I did.
Yeah,
and rewatching
really
this, I was like, Christ, it's like the mythical Chinese meal where you eat it, feel full, and then afterwards you think, actually, I'm still hungry. This was something I enjoyed at the time. I watched it this time. It's like, what did I find to enjoy about this other than, admittedly, Saran Jones?
I think it is possible to watch something and think, God, can have the wool pulled over your eyes a bit by the fact that it sounds like it's a classic idea.
Yeah.
And in the same way, you could imagine people thinking, wow, Web of Fear's got to be great because the Yeti come back and it's UNIT. And then you watch it and, does it stand up as a story? Well, we've got our own opinions on that. But the Yeti came back in that just because they happened to have the monsters in storage, and and UNIT went on to be something that came on. Well, it's not UNIT, is it?
No one was planning for this to be the statement.
Whereas people can assume something's a big deal for probably the wrong reasons.
Yeah. No, this is an empty vessel for me. I was not feeling this.
Probably still one of the best episodes in the series, though.
What, did you pro it to the pirate one?
Maybe, yes, no.
So, Matt, are you pleased this is the idea that they took from Zagreus rather than Sylvester McCoy as Uncle Winky? Or the ghost of John Pertwee, as I seem to remember, cobbled together from audio.
From some old audio tapes. Yeah, God, now I want to go to... Okay, so maybe this is the best thing I can say about The Doctor's Wife. It's made me want to go back and revisit Zagreus, which are words I never thought I'd say.
No, but my daughter, she's 16.
Yeah.
It's not what every 16-year-old wants on their Christmas list, is it? I want my dad to be in a show about sex.
Yeah, exactly.
Where he's doing sex.
That'd be the worst nightmare.
Yeah, and so she's not particularly happy about that. But she does mention that every now and again she Googles Michael Sheen naked. Why on earth?
No, don't
just
do
to embarrass
that.
me. Just to embarrass me.
She just does that.
Yeah, I think it's a way of her being able to deal with it. If she can see what's out there, then she's all right.
Okay, and for our final story tonight, and the final story that Jim will be reviewing as a regular contributor to this podcast. So,
bye-bye.
Yeah, shed a tear, everyone.
It's the end.
It's the
moment has been well prepared for.
But how's this for an occasion? We're going back to New Year's Day, 1977. 1st of January, 1977, this started going out, for The Face of Evil, which sees the Fourth Doctor landing on an unnamed jungle world where he meets Leela, who, along with all the other members of her tribe, the Sever Team, recognises the Doctor as the mythical Evil One, enemy of their god Xoanon. The mystery is due to an earlier visit, which resulted in a powerful computer taking on the Doctor's personality, then suffering a breakdown. The planet's population are now split between the warrior class Sever Team and the technical elite, the Tesh. So this is probably most notable for the fact that after a one-off companionless story, The Deadly Assassin, this sees the Doctor meet his new friend Leela. Quite a different sort of companion from the outgoing Sarah Jane Smith. It is very positive.
I'll say.
And how. I think this has a very strong reputation, doesn't it? People seem to like this a lot.
It does have a strong reputation, but then it's between Deadly Assassin and Robots of Death and Talons of Weng Chiang. So even amongst that, it's up against some pretty stiff competition.
But this is from, I mean, to use the...
It picks up viewers during the run as well. Like, every episode gains more viewers.
I wonder why.
Have you seen what Doctor Who's new girl's wearing? Oh, Christ, I need to tune in for that.
Just saying. It starts with 10.7 million, then 11.1, 11.3, and ends on 11.7.
So, yes, I mean, the cliche that is often used for this period is that Doctor Who was, quote-unquote, at the height of its powers. You've got...
And this is pretty much halfway through the classic series.
Hinchcliffe and Holmes, that's the creative team, writer Chris Boucher. Seems like it's going to be a bit of an unimpeachable classic, but if anyone can find something to grouse about, it's the I'll Explain Later boys.
Sorry, who?
Jim, what do you think of this?
I'm a very big fan of this story. I did just mention you got the sort of the stories around it have a even better reputation, but I love this, and watching it again, it still holds up really well. I'll go into why in a moment, but I'll just say I'm glad this is the last story I'm reviewing as a sort of regular member of the team. Because this is the story which, I think I said on the last show, I fell out of love with Doctor Who during the Colin Baker years. And not just in that sense of the show's not as good as it used to be. I kind of just gave up on Doctor Who and eventually gave all my stuff away, all my books and magazines and whatnot. And then, about 15 years later, a friend happened to turn up who we occasionally watched a bit of Doctor Who, and there've been the repeats on BBC Two, things like Planet of the Daleks, which we've mentioned. But somehow watching this really got me back into Doctor Who. There's a lot just about the aesthetic of it. It's a jungle world which seems like a classic Doctor Who setup, but it's a brilliant jungle, I think. It's brilliantly rendered and filmed. Tom Baker, and we've reviewed a lot of his stories, I think is absolutely on point as the Doctor here. In equal parts curious, inquisitive, really high on the morality of having to sort out the situation, but he's a complete dick as well. He's a real arsehole to people right through it. And Louise Jameson as Leela is fantastic. I mean, she is like the Doctor Who girl that I grew up on. She was the companion when I started watching. We've reviewed a few of her stories, but she's really standout in this. She's absolutely on a par with the Doctor, even though she's obviously not as experienced as him, but she's driving a lot of the action. She's very proactive in keeping things moving. So as a story, I think it really holds up. The setup is such a familiar one of, it's a world where, it's split between the warrior people and the technical people. Familiar going way back to things like the Time Machine and whatnot. And it's kind of interesting here, this is 1977, it acknowledges that the audience are going to be so familiar with that setup that they don't keep it as a reveal till later in the story. Pretty much early on, the reveal is just that they've got the gong, which is the sheet of metal with survey team. It's like it's knowing that the audience are going to join those dots immediately. Then does something even more interesting with that whole idea of the enemy being the Doctor in a weird way. So I've rabbled on about it quite a bit. John?
I thought this was really dull. Sorry.
Okay.
I thought it was, I would have pegged it more as a sort of Christopher Bidmead style sort of wannabe sci-fi. It seemed to start off with a pretty unsophisticated anti-superstition message, and I was like a bit meh. I won't lie, I got a bit more into it when there's that reveal of the Doctor's face as the carving, sort of like
Mount Rushmore
styley. But when it descended into, they were from a survey team and they split into two factions and the computer went a bit haywire, I felt like it was just treading water, really. It didn't, for me... And the tribe did seem to me to be relatively uninteresting. It certainly doesn't compare to other sort of tribal communities that we've encountered. So, the Aztecs, for example, seems to have a much more developed world to it, which I think, and there's similar, although this isn't a treatise on cultural relativism, perhaps, but, there's a sort of overlap there in terms of what's being played with, in terms of the belief systems of the tribe and so on. But this seemed just rather typical. There are two big standout positives for me, which are that Tom Baker seems to be rather on the leash, and his costume is so good. I'd forgot. We seem to have been watching later ones where his costume's fallen apart a bit, or has been replaced with a more burgundy effort. And this is just this is the one that I want. This is how I want him to look.
I think even the green hat's good, isn't it?
Yeah, I love the green hat. It's fantastic. And I completely agree, Jim, that Leela arrives fully formed. She's wise and rational. which is not how you it's not always how she's written later on. And I think she is most effective when she is actually intuitive, wise, and rational. I mean, the thing begins not with a boring TARDIS console scene, but with the trial of Leela for bringing the ideas of rationality to the table.
Yeah. I mean, it throws you in media res, isn't that the phrase? Where it's just like, oh, wow, okay, the story's starting.
And that, from Chris Boucher's perspective, that is actually quite an interesting, right, straight in kind of approach, because it's not always the case with Doctor Who that you get that. You do sometimes, but you don't. It's not even just like a bit of Dudley Simpson bum, 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 with a space cruiser going by and then a pilot going 41, 84, and then gently going into a conversation about, I see that the local order Planet 42 has come through again. No, it's just
this will be a separate podcast where we improv various series.
You know
of
what I mean?
classic
It's
Doctor
Did you
Who.
replace Neil Gaiman as...
But it's not that. It is straight into something of import.
Yes.
And that sets up the entire...
Weighty.
Yeah. So I give it some points for that, and I think Leela does, I think Louise Jameson's great. Actually, I've lost count now of the number of times where I say, oh, Louise Jameson's really good. Actually, she is really good in pretty much everything.
Yeah, she's brilliant.
And Leela's good as a character, but I think she's perhaps never better than certainly in the ones I've seen than here, where she begins as wise and rational, but with that sort of intuitive edge as well. But just and the cliffhanger to episode 3, actually, I will
brilliant.
say, is really cool. It's super cool with the computer saying, "Who am I?" and
in like various voices, including a young child.
Yeah,
Child
the final one is the
screaming out.
young child screaming, which is really scary.
But you see the image of Tom Baker's face
Looking
screaming
pained,
those words as the child's voice. Yeah.
But just, I guess, apart from there being a sort of anti-superstition sort of subtext and some stuff around losing sight of what technology is for, I guess maybe if you squint a bit, especially because there's the oh-so-hilarious therapist's chair scene at the end, that there's a sort of coming through mental illness aspect to it as well, because there's... What's the computer called?
Zoanon.
Zoanon, it seems, to have a split personality or some kind of personality disorder, and then it's resolved. Although resolving it by having one of the split personalities be a real person who then deletes themselves, that's not necessarily going to work for everyone out there who suffers from a split personality.
That's not current guided best practice, is it?
No, Nice haven't written about that one.
Jesus and Napoleon turn up.
But no, I just don't see that there's a lot to it, really.
Mad.
I think I'll slightly split the difference between the two of you, because I've seen this before a couple of times and sort of generally liked it before, and I think watching it this time round, I think there is loads to like about this, and I think some of that comes down to the script. I think some of the dialogue is really pin sharp in this. I think it's a very well written script. And I find the ideas really interesting, particularly as, it boils down to it's a computer with a split personality undertaking an experiment in eugenics, essentially, is what's going on the planet. So I find a lot of the ideas interesting. It's interesting that, I'm not sure if this is the first time we've seen this in Doctor Who, but it becomes a trope very much during the Moffat era. He revisits it, and a lot of his writers revisit it, of the idea, the explanation being, the whole reason for all of this is because a computer has got out of hand and is essentially just acting how it thinks it needs to act, and it can be reprogrammed, put on the right track. Obviously that's the resolve of to an extent, Girl in the Fireplace, but certainly Empty Child, and the Pirates one that we looked at. I can't remember what it's called.
Curse of the Black Spot.
Yeah. And in some ways it did remind me of some of those, what I would describe as Moffat near misses, in that I think the ideas are good, and I think there's a lot of extraordinary images in particular. I mean, it sort of bombards you with incredibly unusual stuff that's very, very memorable. I mean, John mentions the cliffhanger to the end of episode 3, which I think is absolutely extraordinary. But there's other things, like a lot of the sort of odd stuff in the jungle, just the image of the Doctor on Mount Rushmore, all of this stuff's good. And I think the ideas and basic setup is good. But I think it just needs a few more... I think there are bits of it where it just doesn't feel terribly engaging. I think episodes 2 and 3, which, and I find it really interesting that he does put his cards on the table very early on and basically explain what the deal with the Sever team is. But then, to me, it seems like there's quite a lot of running on the spot, which normally in a 4-parter would be about teasing that mystery out a bit longer, where we're spending a lot of time with the Sever team and then ultimately the Tesh, none of whom I think in and of themselves are particularly interesting characters. I mean, there's a few. I quite like Neva, the shaman character, and Leslie Schofield as Caleb is quite fun in places. But to me, it felt like there's a real sag in the middle until it sort of rallies for its final, that final cliffhanger, but then also the final revelations. And yeah, and I think in some ways, I mean, it just reminds me of a lot of those. I'm not sure what the engagement I'm meant to have with it is, other than to appreciate the cleverness of the ideas and enjoy some of the images. That said, it is remarkable, some of the stuff that we see here, and a lot of the sort of Zoanon type scenes as well, and the voices coming out of the stereo recorder, and when you first clock that it's the Doctor's voice, that's really striking. And the only Doctor Who could do so straight-faced the idea of the shaman with basically the cricket glove stuck on his head, making him look a bit like a chicken. It's a bit like Feathers McGraw from The Wrong Trousers, I think, with the glove on his head.
And again, the Doctor comments on that immediately before the audience gets a chance to, And I do love the scene when the Doctor's sort of dragged before the tribe with the scarf around his face. Neva's jumping around with the, is it a particle accelerator or something?
Yeah.
And the Doctor's lines to him there, I think, are fantastic. He said, see how he tries to deceive us? He said, I wouldn't dream of. I can see you're a being of superior intellect or something, while he's dancing around him. Well,
that's where the dialogue, I mean, as I say, and I do think this is full of really pin-sharp dialogue that I really enjoyed, a lot of which is designed to immediately wrong foot where you think a lot of those conventions are going. The to and fro during the stand back or I'll kill you with this deadly jelly baby, and the guy says, fine, do it. And then he says, I don't take orders from anyone. That sort of tick-tock kind of to and fro sort of shifting of how you normally expect these things to play out is really good. The bit where Leela says, there's no point in praying if you're not expecting an answer, and the Doctor says, I could quote you a few theologians who'd give you an argument on that. And then the bit where the stereo sort of starts speaking back to him, and he says, he's got a hotline to God. It's like these are unusual lines and dialogue and ideas that you don't normally find in Doctor Who. So I think there is something sort of clever and thoughtful and interesting going on here. But as I say, it's just, for me, the kind of dramatic engagement with it did sort of really drop off in the middle. But again, just it's at its best when it's bombarding you with sort of ideas and images, because I think that a lot of the characters are quite thin.
I disagree a bit, because I think the actual tribespeople, I do think they've got quite a bit of variety going on in there. You've got interesting characters like Caleb, who's doing things for his own political gain, and he believes the Doctor. He thinks this is all rubbish about Zoanon being a god and whatnot, and he's neither on their side or not. He's sort of doing his own thing. Andor
as is Neva to an extent.
Yeah.
The fact that Neva takes it on himself to kill God is his mission is quite something.
A good payoff for him. But yeah, it's the kind of story I like, when there isn't really an out-and-out villain. There are various people who are taking advantage of the situation to their own ends, but really the enemy's ignorance in it most of the time. Once that's resolved and there's a light shined on it, things become, things resolve that way. It is kind of a weird setup that the Doctor's absolutely screwed over this planet for thousands and thousands of years, though, I think. All right, he takes the responsibility for that, but he doesn't seem that bothered by it, or am I expecting too much from a tea time show?
Well, I sort of wonder, because a lot of those things that it throws up, and I sort of made a comparison to sort of Moffat's writing, but there are a lot of things in this that do feel like quite new series concerns, like the consequences of the Doctor's actions. We mentioned there's a few things like, I think the massacre touches on that at the end. But that is a relatively unexamined, he is largely a guy who turns up and sorts everything out. And I think that is an interesting and dramatically fruitful idea. The Doctor did that once before and actually ended up screwing everything up. Well, so there's that idea that the story goes on beyond the end credits, but not just at the point where the Doctor decides to fuck off. But also, yeah, I mean, that sort of throwing you hard into the story as opposed to just the sort of gentle winding up that John mentioned. That these stories have, there are a lot of kind of new series techniques going on here. I mean, I think other than the fact that it's a thing that he does feel the responsibility to put right. I mean, yes, he doesn't seem too aggrieved by it as such, or doesn't seem to have, he doesn't have the sort of crisis of faith that, say, the David Tennant Doctor might have in a similar situation, or the Eccleston Doctor. But then I think that suits his portrayal here. I mean, it's like you say, I think he's really good in this, and I think he's written really well, and he's basically like a sort of charismatic bastard. It's like he exudes a certain charisma that makes you warm to him. But that scene at the end where there's almost just like the extent to which, and I think we're certainly used to kind of warmer Doctors, both in the classic series and certainly in the modern series, when Leela says, "Can I come with you?" And he just looks at her and goes, "Why?" And then she says, well, you like me, don't you? And he says, "Yes, but I like lots of people. I can't cart them all around the universe." And he's like fully prepared just to walk off and piss off out of there. It's great. And he's got that almost kind of, it was so alien because he just doesn't, he can't communicate on that sort of emotional level. I think it's a really good read on the character.
But the Doctor communicating, got this odd scene very early on when he materialises, comes out and it just addresses the audience directly.
I really enjoyed that.
A few times as well, doesn't he?
Yeah, if any of the Doctors are going to talk to themselves, you get the impression that the fourth Doctor would.
Yeah.
But I think he's breaking the fourth wall, though. I mean, he says, like, "Oh, of course not, Doctor," as if he's talking to himself. But he's staring the audience right in the eye. And actually, I thought, I quite like that as a meta device. I wish they'd done that a bit more often.
I was quite engaged at that point. The Tribe, I agree they've tried to do a few different characters and sort of give it a bit of life. But just one of the other things is that, like, what is Leela Smurfette? I mean, there's it's just like,
well,
how are they going to reproduce? I think there's one other woman at some point walks past, but just generally speaking,
hold up, lads, we've banished the only woman.
It's not, it's not like a fully realised world. I mean, even
they're an idea rather than characters, I think, for the most part. Although I do agree with Jim that I think a couple of them are, stand out a little bit.
Yeah, but again, thinking back to, say, the Aztecs, the male and female roles in that society are quite clearly laid out and explored. I guess that's not the point here. There's more of a sci-fi thing going on.
The Aztecs is 100% about the culture and trying to show us something about a real historical one, whereas they're more not quite dressing, but they're not the entire point.
I just find it very difficult to... So I love Russell T Davies because it's about character and human interaction and what does that mean? What do relationships mean and how do they work? I like a good sci-fi thing that's just like, oh my god, these people have invaded, what are we going to do? Or, something like, I didn't love The Invasion, but some of the ideas they were playing with about, the military-industrial complex or sci-fi as allegory, something that's here, I just don't, well, what if a schizophrenic computer did, play out a eugenics experiment in front of, I can't see what the point is that it's trying to make. Yes, eugenics is bad. Technology can go wrong. There's superstitions, but it doesn't seem to me to knit together.
I think it's about the consequences of the Doctor, of the Doctor appearing somewhere. Because thankfully we haven't seen that story. It's not a sequel to something from a long time ago in a continuity way. But
he seems to have largely forgotten until he clocks later on what's going on.
It's a long time. But we've mentioned often enough, as of other people, that so often the Doctor, as he does here, once he's solved it, he just wants to bugger off again and have nothing to do with it. So I think that's not a bad thing that he's going to have to, reap what he's sown.
Yeah, and it's just oddly, now that you sort of spelled that out, because you're saying, John is essentially saying sort of what's the emotional hook here that sort of pulls you through the sci-fi. And I think you're right that I think it is that it's the idea that we're examining consequences of here. Normally when we see the Doctor intervening in a society, he's often there for the crucial moment of societal revolution or overthrow.
Or even the mutants, don't they?
Yes, exactly. But he very rarely sticks around for the consequences, for basically the slow grind of rebuilding that society and how things can go right and wrong. And obviously that is quite a new series concern. It's nice to see the classic series tugging on those threads. But it's a shame it's sort of almost slightly buried in the mix. That it's, I personally think the little sci-fi mystery that it sets up about the Tesh, about the computer, about the Sever team, all of these kind of things are good. But it's.
But he doesn't learn anything about that here either. So he clocks that he's fucked up, he fixes it, and then just at the point where the two irreconcilable societies are coming together and they need him to mediate, he says,
you're just reading the back of the DVD cover now, aren't you, John?
What? Yeah.
But that's quite interesting that it feels quite explicitly anti-interventionist at the end, or certainly the overall message of this is that actually the Doctor doesn't have a place in intervening in this kind of thing, which, as I say, I'm not sure if that's something we necessarily agree on, but is certainly an interesting idea. It's explicitly saying he's completely screwed this society up and set it off on entirely the wrong track, and he's going to right what he's done, but he very explicitly says it's not my responsibility to actually sort out how this is going to work.
I just think if you
I find interesting.
If you want something on the arrogance of the Doctor and the perils of intervention, go and watch Waters of Mars, which is a damn sight better than this. It would be my advice.
You couldn't have watched it in 1977, though.
Yeah, but I can now.
That's very true.
And anyone listening to this now can do that now. So, save yourself, what is it, 200 minutes.
Although it's now left Netflix, The Waters of Mars,
minutes.
so you might not be able to catch it.
100 minutes, sorry.
Catch it again. I think this looks brilliant.
Oh, yeah.
The jungle is magnificent, and I think does do that trick, which I think comes up a couple of times, of shooting in the studio but shooting on film so that psychologically you think they're outside, which is a really smart little trick. And the opening shot with the TARDIS arriving just as the little creature is sort of moving past through the sand, that reminds me of a level of design detail that I think we used to see quite a lot in the Hartnell era, but had sort of drifted off in later in terms of just portraying these alien worlds in quite primary colours.
Yeah, it's a shame they weren't around for Kinder.
Yeah, well, no, I was thinking, I seem to remember quite liking The Jungle and Kinder as well, but this really does feel like a whole world, really, just full of great little shots. Like when they go through the mountain, which is the way into whatever the barrier thing that Zoanon set up,
going through his mouth.
But then just the long shot of the ship just resting on almost like a sort of empty desert plain, like it's the one landing craft on Mars or something. I think this is. I think the imagery of this is the thing that really stands out for me, and that I really enjoyed and appreciated about it. As a visual experience, I think this is really rich. We've
mentioned Leela and Louise Jameson. We've also reviewed a few more of her stories. Is she better than? Does she ever get better than she is here, do you think? Or is this her... is it that old sad thing of the companion starts strong and then drifts away from the original?
In my view, I think this, in a way, sadly, is her best. Even though it's in a set of episodes that I think, with a very academic hat on, I'd describe as meh.
Is it a green hat?
It would be a green sort of velour hat, but which folds up nicely as well, which I think is just, that makes it
practical,
really practical. But no, even though this is a mere set of episodes, actually, in the same way that I thought that Saran Jones gave a standout performance in an episode that I otherwise thought was a bit crap, in fact, quite a lot crap. I don't think this is like run-of-the-mill Doctor Who procedural stuff for me. It didn't touch the sides. I didn't hate it, but it doesn't really do it for me.
So your final message is 3 stories with standout performances. So you've got Louise Jameson, Saran Jones, and
George
Rick James.
Probably, yes. But no, I think that although she perhaps doesn't get anything as good as this again in terms of just being central to the plot, because she's introduced, it's the plot. I was reading that she wasn't even meant when they were sort of. It wasn't intended that she would be the companion even.
No.
Well, that's possibly why it works, because I think a lot of the things that you've pulled out about her here that worthy of praise about her bravery, her inquiring mind, her independence, all of these kind of things are integral to her setup here. And like you say, it's very specific to the situation that we find her in the very first shot. The role of the companion, especially at this point where everything's being made episode by episode, there isn't really that sense of, a developing arc that this character will have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yeah, you don't mean a story arc, but character development.
Character arc is a perfectly legitimate phrase.
But I just want to be very clear that even though she perhaps doesn't get better meat than this, dramatically, that I think nonetheless that actually she's often been the high point of other stories that we've looked at where she's in it. I think she's underrated perhaps as a companion. I don't know if that's just because she's just after Sarah Jane or doesn't have that immediate link in people's minds as Jo Grant or something, but I think she's a terrific companion. She's great in this, but no, I think she's very good in the subsequent series.
She's clearly a bloody good actress, but it's interesting as well. I mean, the documentary on the DVD for this is great as well, where she talks about how there were certain things when she was thinking about how to get a read on the character and how she might interact with the world. She was looking at both the body language of the 3-year-old girl who lived next door and how she interacted with the world, but also her pet dog, who would suddenly just go onto a state of high alert because something is sort of clocked. And it's really interesting. They then showed a bunch of clips where, like, she has all these little head movements where she's suddenly sort of twitching around because something has caught her eye or ear or something. But yeah, and there's also something
How does she feel about... Sorry, I just wondered if she had anything to say in that about being objectified, because... like, she is extremely attractive, and her, she's got a great body, like she does. I mean, that's clear. And they're doing their very level best to make sure you see as much of it as possible.
Yeah, she certainly mentions it quite a bit, but seems accepting of that.
Well,
I don't think she has a negative.
The extent to which she goes into it in the documentary is that, she was. All the lighting crew were very appreciative that she was working on the show and that they enjoyed lighting it. It's all sort of quite jokey. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, she possibly a DVD, if she did feel aggrieved about it, a DVD extra wouldn't be the place to say it.
The one thing I would
it's quite clear what they're doing.
It is. And the one thing I would say is that the men are just as skimpily dressed as...
There's something for the ladies.
A lot of nipples in this, isn't
You've got Thomas is kind of a himbo, isn't
but
he?
But in terms of... totally. But in terms of, like, she's the only woman in it, and they pick her up for the rest of the series, like, yeah. I mean, but she is terrific. I'm not downplaying her performance, but I'm saying, like, you don't have to be Brain of Britain to see what they're doing there.
No, absolutely not. But no, I think she is great in this, and
I think it reflects well on us that we've discussed her performance thus far without referring to the leather leotard.
No.
That's all I'm saying.
Well done. Pat on the back.
I did ask for the little flat to be put on the back because, like all of us, we have quirks. There's parts of us that we're not that fond of, and my huge arse was one of them. So I insisted on this little flap.
So, John, remind me what I'm not allowed to say at this point in the podcast.
You're recording?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that about wraps it up for...
Because I always...
Insert month here.
Insert month here. Yeah. Okay. Well... that's your fucking lot for him.
We've run out of time on this podcast.
Well, that's about all we've got time for. Shall I bring that in?
That's great. I like that.
Okay. Well,
I'm afraid that's all we've got time for.
I was going to say, speaking of time's up, but not time's up as in the
hashtag.
Time's up.
We're all dressed in black.
We're all dressed in black because we are mourning the fact that now this is Jim's time as a regular contributor to the podcast is now drawing to a close. Any final thoughts, Jim?
Glad it's over.
Doctor Who can be really good sometimes, and sometimes not so much.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Well, we might expand on those one day.
These 3 years have been worth it. But I will say, from the heart, it has been a remarkable 3 years of podcasting with you. I've thoroughly enjoyed this. And I think, obviously the show will continue in a slightly different format. It's just
Rick James is coming in.
Yes. The singer.
Replacement. The dead singer.
The dead singer. Doctor Who is something I've loved for several decades, but I've never found it as fascinating or as rich as I have sitting here discussing it with both of you guys. But, it was back in the midst of time. It was your suggestion first when you mentioned in a pub to me, had we thought about starting a Doctor Who podcast?
Yeah, get me out of Midnight Video and let's do something else.
Yeah, let's do something else.
No, it's been fantastic. And it's been great getting to know you two guys much better than I did previously. I've really enjoyed
so much
doing
so
it.
You're leaving London.
So much leaving London. And it's been great. And like I say, I'll be back. I'll be coming back from time to time.
Of Jim.
Yes, quite. And just thanks to it's been great that we maybe don't have the biggest audience, but we seem to have a very enthusiastic one. So little opportunity to say thanks to everyone who's been so supportive.
Absolutely. We will also just say, to mark this momentous occasion, we had a little whip round.
Oh.
I say whip round off the two of us. We didn't.
Oh, yeah,
get,
Matt,
none of our listeners. And in
checks in
fact,
the
John,
post.
you still owe me money for this. We would just like to present you with this as a little
This
token
gold
of our
clock.
appreciation. So, Jim, this is a little present from myself and John to say thank you for the last 3 years and just to help you remember us in your new home.
Times to
You've
come.
taken the price tag off, right?
Yep.
Oh, my giddy aunt, which is Troughton's catchphrase. Thank you so much. This is a Doctor Who masterpiece collection with a very stern-looking John Pertwee with hands on hips. That's fantastic.
A John
Thanks
Pertwee
a lot,
bust.
guys. Yes.
That
John
sort of-
Pertwee or bust.
Almost looks like him. I mean, I think
does.
it's Patrick Troughton's face, obviously, with John Pertwee's hair and costume.
Yeah, it's the famous thing of when the Dennis Fisher, Tom Baker was just Mike Hunt. No, what's his name? Who was the Gambit in the Avengers?
Oh, Mike Gam-
Mike Hunt.
Mike. Was it Mike Hunt?
It was Mike
Gareth.
Hunt.
Gareth,
Gareth
Hunt.
Hunt. That's it. Sorry.
We'll have to edit.
Sorry,
this
say
out.
that again.
No, we've
it's-
definitely earned the explicit tag on iTunes this month.
You know that photo of Sean Pertwee when he wore
yeah.
the costume for I think it was Halloween?
Halloween, yes.
Yeah.
It looks exactly like that.
It is. That's probably what he based it on. In fact, it is meant to be Sean Pertwee, isn't it? rather than-
Sean
yeah.
Pertwee dressed
well,
out.
Thanks so much, guys. That's fantastic.
We
It's
also know
actually
also
super
they're
cool.
not.
And looking at the other offer, thank God you didn't get the Matt Smith one.
or the
What?
Weeping
Hold on.
Angel.
Was is it? There's the 11th, 10th, and 4th Doctors and Captain Jack.
Yeah, and Amy Pond, I think, is the.
Yes.
Christ, is there
Yeah.
Amy Pond?
And an
Yeah.
80s Cyberman. Gosh.
Also, I do quite like. I mean, this sort of feels in the school of like Danbury Mint stuff that got advertised. I mean, but it's the fact that it is from the Doctor Who Masterpiece collection.
That's why Captain Jack's there.
This is the third Doctor's elegant resolve and flair for fashion are captured perfectly in this astonishingly detailed 3/4 length premium sculpt.
With no legs.
is the word they use. Yeah, they couldn't be bothered to do his legs.
Diligently fashioned in blue onyx.
So Jim, where will you put this in your new digs? The shower, maybe?
Oh, yes, with has it got tattoos on the arms as well?
Oh, I don't know if the clothes are removable.
Oh.
I don't think that goes to the territory for a bust.
You have kept the receipt, haven't you? That's,
Yeah,
that's wonderful.
it's just on the floor behind the sofa.
That's fantastic. No, that'll certainly be on my mantelpiece in whichever house I move into in Redditch in the future. So
little-
yeah, thanks again. That's astonishing. And yeah, thank God it is Pertwee. Certainly the best Doctor. I think we can agree on that.
I think so.
Completely, 100%.
Yeah.
If we've learnt one thing over the last 33 episodes, it's that.
So, Matt, if people want to apply for my job,
Yes. Well, we've got a team
No
of
salesman will call.
we've got a team of expert headhunters in. Obviously, I mean, we're screen testing Dermot Crowley and the other guy.
David, whatever his name is, yeah. David, it might even be Fielder. These are the guys on the screen test who aren't Sylvester McCoy.
Little time in the Rani in joke for the fans there, for the heads. But yes, no, if you want to get in touch, or we will happily forward on any correspondence to Jim as well. We'll stay in touch with him obviously after this.
Yeah, I'll probably be sending you a few
exactly.
emails from time to time. If you want to defend the reputation of Face of Evil
Yeah.
against John's brickbats.
If you want to weigh in slightly more enthusiastically than me and John did, email us hello@I'llExplainLater.com, Twitter @ExplainLaterPod, Facebook.com/I'llExplainLater, and obviously via the reviews section on Apple Podcasts as well. As mentioned at the top of the show, we are now going on a break for a couple of months, but
like James Bond, we will return.
we will return.
If
And when we do-
if they pay you enough money.
When we do, we've got another trio of stories that we're going to be looking at.
So we'll see you in the summer, but signing off for now, thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.
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 Sit on my face and tell me that you love me. I'll sit on your face and tell you I love you too. I love to hear you oralize. When I'm between your thighs, you blow me away.
Jim, what order are we doing these episodes in today?
As usual, the ones that I've written down, I think so. The Mutants, then the
That's a bit
Jesus,
catty, isn't it?
passive aggressive.
Meow.
Yeah.
That's survival-tastic, that is.
33 shows in, he's reached his final show and he's thought, fuck it, I've had enough
Yeah.
of these guys.
Do it live. Fucking thing sucks.
Sorry, I spent yesterday having to watch 7 episodes of Blake 7.